Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again this evening to talk with United Wadi right here on Salam Media. Wonderful to be with you. And also in the company of our listeners, our viewers on the various platforms of Salam Media. We welcome you to the show. And again, promising to be quite an interesting discussion as we unpack the passing away of former Minister of Public Enterprises, the former Minister of Finance, SARS Commissioner. We're talking of Pravin Gordhan. Now, clearly, there has been a lot of reaction to the passing away of the former minister, and a lot of positives, but also negatives at the same time. And tonight, we are going to attempt to unpack the apartheid stalwart. Now, we know he contributed immensely to movements like the UDF and also set up campaigns in the 80s. In the 90s, he played a significant role in the CODESA negotiations, constitutional development, and also looking at the new modeling of SARS, South African Revenue Services, but also at the same time, when one looks at South Africa and during the state capture years, we saw the whole issue surrounding the Gupta saga, the mobilization of civil society, having been removed as finance minister for a period of around 3 days, but also at the same time looking at his performance as the Minister of Public Enterprise, particularly looking at the decline of Eskom, Transnet, Post Office. And there were just so many issues with regard to privatization. And also, when one looks at his defense of people like Andre de Ruyter, all of this at the end of the day, the post office is just so much that we can talk about when we speak about public enterprises. And tonight, we're going to be unpacking a lot of that in the company of our panelists. We've got Crown Prince Adil Nchabeleng, President of Transform RSA, and also an independent energy expert. Him and I have discussed quite often with regard to Pravin Gordhan and the whole Eskom issue. I see Crown Prince Adil is on. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you, my brother, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you so much.
Yes, also joining us is Mathews Sparks, COSATU Parliamentary Coordinator. Mathews, good evening to you, sir, and welcome to you as well.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Yes, and Ashraf Patel, researcher at Institute for Global Dialogue. Ashraf, assalamu alaikum, and we thank you for your time.
Wa alaikum salam, and good evening to fellow panelists.
Yes, and also we'd just like to point out that we had invited Neeshan Bolton from the Ahmed Katharada Foundation to the broadcast, but we got a message late afternoon saying that he is attending a memorial and will be unable to attend. But at the same time, we obviously wanted another representative from COSATU, Pakamile, who was supposed to join us as well, but Neeshan obviously declined, wanted to be on the same platform as Pakamile. But that is just to set the record straight. But let's get into Pravin Gordhan, his legacy. And there's just so much to actually talk about this man. Obviously, he was a stalwart, but a very, very mixed, complicated legacy. And Adil, you're right on top of the screen. And let's just, by way of introduction, just an overview, just your overall assessment now that we see so much being said, so much being written, both positive and negative about the former minister.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And again, assalamu alaikum. I think, Inayat, the topic of tonight is a bit interesting in a sense that here you have a political figure who has contributed immensely to the liberation struggle and has played a major role in South Africa for the fight for liberation in terms of during the apartheid days and then the post-apartheid era of South Africa, and rising up the ranks to becoming one of the most prominent ministers at some point during, I think, the last sixth administration. Pravin was regarded as the prime minister within that administration, even though it did not end up in that nature where the relations were good and actually sparkling. I think at some point there was issues between Pravin and the presidency because of some of the knowledge we know, in terms of the back-to-back, issues between themselves. But I mean, overall, he really made a major contribution in the pre-liberation era. During the liberation struggle, there was a huge amount of contribution, as well as, the fighting for South Africa's freedom. At the time, I mean, they came and rose out of the then South African Indian Congress at the time, and they were very proactive, as well as the Natal, I think, Indian Congress at the time. Yeah, they were very proactive in terms of doing that, and then moving back and then joining the likes of at the time when they were able to actually become part of the larger group, which was political party, which is the ANC, that gave away, that gave full liberation and democracy to South Africa. So Pravin and them, literally, contributed immensely towards South Africa's liberation struggle. The challenge came thereafter, after the post, when there was now almost an environment where there must be power sharing. If you could remember, Pravin was the first person and his committee at the time to head something called the TEC, which was a Transitional Executive Committee, before the introduction and ushering in of the full democracy that we enjoy. As well as post that, he became very instrumental as a very strong, cadre in terms of the structures within the ANC, to a point where he was actually even appointed to become the commissioner of SARS. And then post that, he became the minister, and he was a minister of treasury at some point, and has been in that role until he was moved from treasury into the post of being the Minister of Public Enterprise. And it was at that time, when he was at Public Enterprise, that he really got extremely tested, because there were a lot of, almost, back to back and back to forward type of clashes between Labour as well as the current the previous administration, in terms of their trajectory, in terms of economic growth. So when you see the current public outrage regarding the passing away of, late stalwart Pravin Gordhan, most of it is informed on the basis that people, I think, caught on to the late tail aspect of it, and were extremely unhappy and unpleased with some of the decisions that God made, that people feel that were actually selling out South Africa. And that's why there was a huge sort of outbreak in public and media outcry. We neutral people when it comes to opinion and views. So we don't hold daggers, as well as views that are either vicious or kind towards. We just open analysts in terms of what we say and what we see in happening in the media. He made a major contribution towards the liberation struggle. He made a major contribution towards the institutionalization of South Africa. Their path in terms of a fork happened when Pravin was removed as a Minister of Treasury, and in that little scuffle, there was a role played by major WMC, which is a white monopoly capital, in terms of reinstating him back into that position again. But and there was a demand that they wanted to have a certain particular candidate, and then thereafter he was reintegrated back into government, not necessarily into treasury, but given another opportunity to play other roles in ministries. That's why he came back as a Minister of Public Enterprise, etc., etc. But the legacy is what it is. But it shows you that as public officials, people have to be conscious of who they are serving. If public itself is outraged, it shows you there was a level of displeasure at their end, irrespective of what we feel about things and how we feel one could have done things much better and everything. And you're still going to see a lot of that outrage happening with other ministers, other cadres, other people coming after this, because now we're at an age where the top tier sort of struggle icons of South Africa, the likes of those that have lived during the apartheid days and were very active and were the liberation stalwarts, when they're passing on in today's era and age, most of the reception towards their passing on is not going to be received in the well manner, as well as a much more appreciated environment. There's going to be a bit of an outrage, and what you're seeing right now is exactly that. the later disappointment. But again, some of it is informed and some of it is misinformed.
Well, shukran for that, Adil. And let's bring Matthew into the discussion. Now, when we're looking at Pravin Gordhan, clearly, as Adil articulated, a lifetime of service, and he rose, against apartheid. We've seen his political life, how it has obviously taken a turn over a period of time. And personally, I've had the opportunity of doing a face-to-face interview with the late minister. And at that point in time, I found him to be very, very astute, Matthew, but also looking at this lifetime of service that he's given to the movement, to the government as well. And more importantly, Adil's pointed out the whole issue surrounding the labor movement. Now, we know COSATU very much a part of the tripartite alliance together with the SA Communist Party as well. And just looking at this relationship between Pravin Gordhan and the labor movement, Matthew.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us. Look, I think first we mourn the loss of Pravin Gordhan. We wish his family well. And I think we also want to appreciate his family for sharing him with us as a country, as a liberation movement for many, many years. He could have lived a comfortable life as a pharmacist, but he chose to stand up against the apartheid regime and to undergo horrendous torture in detention. I think a level of torture and abuse that peacetime heroes today will not be able to imagine. He played a critical role in the drafting of our constitution, our democratic constitution, which compels the state to uplift and to invest in our disadvantaged communities. And, as Adil said, he built SARS into a formidable world-class machinery. And because of the capacity of SARS to collect tax revenue due to the state, it has been able to anchor the entire transformation agenda since 1994. So the 27 million South Africans who receive social grants, the free basic education and meals across our townships, the hundreds of thousands of kids going to tertiary education through NSFAS, the 4 million plus RDP houses have been built by the state, the subsidized public transport, metro rail, buses, etc. That's Pravin's legacy. That's something which has benefited working class communities over the last 30 years and will continue to benefit them. And the fact that we have South Africa's the SARS today, who doesn't mind what is your stature in life. You can be a president, you can be whatever you are. If you owe money to the SARS, you will have to pay that money. That's the kind of institution that he built. So Adil is right in terms of building institutionalizational capacity in a democratic state. Look, he was not perfect, and I don't think any of us can ever claim to be perfect. But I think Pravin is a forthright person. He told you how he felt. He pushed you to do more. He even pushed us as COSATU to do more. We had disagreements, but I think we never doubted his integrity, his commitment to the Constitution, and his passion for South Africa and for serving the poor. And yes, he inherited a mess at the Public Enterprises Department when he took over. And it is not an easy task. Eskom had been declining since 2006. We've had load shedding since that period for a variety of reasons, whether it's underinvestment in infrastructure, whether there's a struggling economy, whether there's corruption, mismanagement, cable theft, state capture, all of that. Created a perfect storm, and similarly with Transnet as well, and SAA to a different degree as well. So he came in and really inherited a difficult thing. It was a very difficult time. There's huge difficulties. Workers lost their jobs at SAA, SA Express. The economy was on its knees because of load shedding. Last year, January, we had about 12 hours of load shedding a day, absolute devastation. But today, I think, we're beginning to see the fruits of that work, very difficult work, by Pravin, by others like Sputla, Ramokgopa, and so forth, by workers across Eskom, Transnet, SAA. Now today, we've not had load shedding for five months. Not out of the woods yet, but that's real progress. Transnet today, it's still in deep troubles compared to when it was transported 30 years ago, but we're beginning to see a stabilization. And hopefully, we'll begin to see an improvement. We need to see an improvement because it remains, I think, it remains our number one crisis. SAA, with all of its issues, and airlines across the world are very difficult to manage. There's many airlines across the world which have collapsed without our issues as a country. But SAA today is flying once again. So I think, for us, it's a legacy to respect, to appreciate. And he could easily, in fact, he actually should have retired 5 years ago to spend his final chapter of life with his family. It's a tragedy that he just retired months ago and is not getting to enjoy his retirement with the family. But I think, when the president called upon him 5 years ago to serve one last term, it is a mark of the man that he was willing to do that, even though those who know him would actually know he actually did want to call it a day some years ago. And I think, we're better off having a leadership like that who is not perfect, can't be perfect. But I think one never doubted their commitment and their integrity and the defense of the Constitution. At times when things were very dark, when we had politicians who were willing to sell their soul for a buck, people like Pravin were willing to do the unpopular thing. And I don't think we should worry too much about what Twitter says. Whatever you say on Twitter, you'll be condemned. That's the nature of social media. But I think mark him against the Constitution, mark him against what he did in government, and the defense of the rule of law. And as Adil says, when times are dark under apartheid and even under democracy, he stood up to be counted. I think for us, that's the legacy he leaves.
Thank you for that, Matthew. And let's bring Ashraf into the discussion. Now, Ashraf, I just want to obviously just move away slightly from his involvement in government. But I just want to focus, and I know you're much younger than me, Ashraf, but the little that I know, I haven't really lived through the Natal Indian Congress era. But at that point in time, obviously, there are many people that talk about Pravin Gordhan, particularly at the time when he was a student at Westville University, those that have been colleagues, those that have studied with him, and also during the time of the Natal Indian Congress in terms of reviving the movement within a certain community. And I want to refer to the Indian community in particular. And, he chaired various committees, but also I recall the days of the United Democratic Front, because that was at the height of a movement that obviously, that had its footprint at grassroots level as well. And at the same time, he played that leading role, and he recruited people like Mac Maharaj and also quite a few other people. And in terms of non-racial solidarity and championing non-racial solidarity, and this is where you would find that even within certain communities, like the Indian communities, became a lot more politicized at the time of the UDM. And Pravin obviously played quite a major role, Ashraf.
Yes, definitely. I'd like to echo the sentiments of the fellow panelists. There's no doubt that Comrade Pravin played a significant role in the liberation of South Africa, and indeed has been a significant figure in government for the last 3 decades. And it goes without saying, he's been quite regularly in leadership positions across various institutions, as an MP, as a SARS commissioner, as a minister, etc. Looking at the verdict on in media, in academia, in civil society, it is quite clear that there is a mixed reaction, and that would suggest, so for any individual, any leader that talks to a very complicated country. South Africa is not an easy country, but it also talks to leaders all leadership from the very top, whether it was President Mbeki's years and President Zuma's years, all analysts would tell you that there were high points and low points. And therefore, Minister Gordhan had his high points as well as his low points. And I think we have alluded to the record. What's quite interestingly, let's look at post-democracy. I think that is important. The period of the 80s and 90s has been written extensively, and the role and the various complications with the transition has always been a site and continues to be a site for deep reflection and differing opinions. But with Comrade Pravin Gordhan, if we were to look at the period after 1994, he becomes the SARS Commission in 1999, after serving his first term. And yes, at that period, it must be noted, although there is significant discussion on the new innovations that came into play, as well as efficiencies, no doubt over several years or 10 years as commissioner, he has introduced significant innovations, significant efficiencies, but that came against the backdrop of a growing middle class. So you must remember in the 90s, you had tens of thousands of black professionals moving into government, into the private sector. So the base of society, the middle class base, those 15 years after democracy was growing significantly. So some scholars would argue whoever was then the SARS commissioner would be able to have achieved those same kind of goals and objectives. You had the growth of a middle class. And that's an important point to reflect, but taking nothing away from his prowess and his institutional logic and understanding of institution. Now, let's fast forward to his period, the very controversial period of public enterprises. I think that is the very dark period of Pravin Gordhan. And in most cases, he should, or history will reflect on that period very, very critically, and for several reasons. One is those are infrastructure institutions for economic development, particularly ESCOM, Transnet, and the post office. These institutions are essential drivers of economic development, and the decline in that period. Yes, there is the thesis that the roots of the SOE decline goes back maybe 15 years ago. The state capture years played a role. But once you are in power for many years, you then have to take responsibility. One cannot always say that blame it on the state capture years, because that would be disingenuous and dishonest. So let's look at one example. If Minister Gordhan was so efficient as a SARS commissioner, introducing technology and new management systems, why did he not introduce those into the post office? He had the experience, he had the knowledge, he had the systems. Why was the post office? And I can tell you, just this week, 3,700 post office workers are taking their Section 189 retrenchments. There is a blockage on the modernization. There's been no investment in systems in the post office. And we're talking of the post bank, which distributes the SASSA grants. And I think that is a more full picture. If the minister was so efficient and so innovative, why have we not seen that innovation for service delivery in critical posts such as the post office? So I'll leave that as one example for critical reflection.
Yes, Ashraf, thanks for that. And let's bring Councillor Adil back into the discussion. Adil, from what both Mathews and Ashraf are talking, and it is clear that Pravin Gordhan occupied leaderships in various institutions and also as a minister. And these were very, very powerful positions, I must add. Okay. And these positions obviously did not come easily. He was recognized for who he was, for what he knew, for what contribution he could make. But at the end of the day, and I just want to follow up from what Ashraf is saying, because some I've been reading, and some are saying his fatal mistake was to lead the Ministry of Public Enterprises. But there was controversy during the time when he was finance minister as well. And we will recall that he was removed by Jacob Zuma for a period of around 3 days as well. And at that point in time, there were a number of issues. And even when we talk about public enterprises, he was still Minister of Finance. And at that point in time, the SOEs were still in trouble. And there was bailout after bailout after bailout. So it's not that his fatal mistake was when he became the public enterprises minister. There were a number of issues already brewing at the time when he was the finance minister as well, Adil. If you could unmute your mic, please, Adil.
My apologies. I think the battle started way back, because it looks like within the ANC and the alliance itself on a partnership, there was a divergence, ideological, there was a policy, there was a whole, almost a reformulation alliance, divergence where, there was no longer a similar, sort of goal pursued. During the time after, the departure of President Mandela, South Africa lost the, we are one, sort of theme of nation building, that Simonye, we are one, the rainbow nation, and we're going to build this country to becoming what we want to see it. We saw an emergence, and I'm not talking about Pravin now. I'm just giving you a picture of how this whole thing started changing shape. We saw a situation whereby the former liberation struggle icons suddenly got into cushy positions of power, and with that power, almost the thought of South Africans escaped their ability to understand their role in power and politics. They became much more self-aggrandized. It became more about themselves in positions of power, and it became about chasing interest, which is money, power, and wealth. And in that chase, whoever found himself in a position of exerting power as well as exercising overall authority and an almost dictatorial, realm of power in a position, they took it to the level where they took it for themselves. And in this case, we're seeing it with all the politicians. Every politician became super wealth rich, and they became extremely, incredibly empowered financially. And then this is where you started to see where the political ideology divergency happened. Pravin did not move away from being a socialist to becoming a much more entrenched capitalist, and even to a point of being part of the elitist of society in South Africa overnight. It happened on a gradual level when democracy started opening up and people saw the levers of power and the ranks as well as the opportunities that it could present themselves. Obviously, and I'm not making up any stories here, Pravin was part of the elite of society in South Africa. He was part of the, top 100 echelon leading figures, as well as ministerial candidates, to a point where they could make calls on things. And the divergency that I reflected to politically led to the point where ministers in the ANC, including Pravin Gordhan, lost their focus of serving South Africans, and it became about self-serving. They wanted to use the power they have in order to fulfill aspirational needs of power, wealth, and accumulation of money and riches. And we all know, they were in the past, AFF came out very strong, accusing, the former minister, may his soul rest in peace, for having accumulated a huge amount of wealth and having a lot of money and power actually, stashed out externally out of South Africa, away in countries like Canada, as well as in some of the offshore island type of destinations. We shouldn't forget that history. It exists. It's documented. It's here in South Africa, and it's part of the legacy. So, we can paint a rosy picture of the situation of how people live, but not all of it is perfect. So with that power that most of these ministers had, it went to the point whereby in the execution, like as in Ashraf was explaining, we cannot have a situation today where you were a previous minister of a particular department that is today responsible for shedding over 3,000, and not just only 3,000. The post office is on its way to declining and collapse, etc. You cannot have been a minister who was responsible for having run both Treasury and SARS and having run public enterprises. And all of those departments, as we're seeing, they are currently the leading in terms of decline. SOE's decline is in terms of investment, in terms of SOE decline. Denel, we've lost it. Armsco, we've lost it. We've lost almost every SOE you can think of. That was one of the major ones. Eskom was saved because of people like us vocalized the discontent at civil society level, and we said we are not going to sit where we are going to see the privatization of Eskom become a normalized norm, because Eskom was pursuing a trajectory of privatization, and to the point where they wanted to sell the power plants, and to make sure they could sell the power plants, they had to make the power plants look as if, South Africa has no capacity, particularly black people in leadership, have no capacity to manage SOEs, like, for instance, electricity generation, only the private sector. So the privatization of our economy, the decline of our SOEs, was at the hands of some of the ministers, and Pravin Gordhan was one of the ministers that was participating. So his legacy is not a pure Puritarian, angelic figure legacy. It is mixed and mishmashed with a lot of wrong decisions that should have not happened in South Africa, whereby you have a situation where we have an economy that is almost in or 0 or 1%, ailing status. When they had taken this economy, when they inherited it when it was sitting at 5+% of growth, and it was made to decline to this level. Structural adjustments, if I remember and I recall very well, the introduction of structural adjustment programs were actually championed by the Minister of Treasury at the time, and that what happened to be Pravin Gordhan. I mean, he started saying it by saying that we have to cut down costs, which was brilliant. Cut down all of the pegs that the ministers had, but structural adjustment didn't just add at cutting off costs that were not necessary. It ended up at choking the economy at a structural economic development and growth level. So there is quite a lot of things that if you start reflecting deeper into, how this performance of it is. SARS, by the way, as a brilliant example, systems were in place, everything was operating functionally and great, but we don't see a situation whereby SARS pursued institutional investors. Companies in South Africa pay the lowest level of tax, just below 350 billion is paid by companies in South Africa. But whereas when you look at elsewhere, the bulk of the 70% of tax as well as revenue collection is actually collected privately, pay as you earn, and as well as VAT and other income taxes that they actually levy on us. So you start asking yourself, where was the vigilancy to say corporate South Africa should be held responsible in paying its fair share of taxes? This is not a critique to Pravin Gordhan. I'm talking about leadership in general in South Africa, to say they moved from a socialist ideological leaning and completely moved to a much more liberal, much more capitalist, market-orientated environment, and everything became about the structural adjustment that were imposed by the institutions, the IMF, World Bank, and all of them, about liberalization of the economy and selling of the assets of South Africa and making South Africa less lenient towards supporting state-owned entities and then making sure that they could break up and sell off the current state-owned entities.
Yes, Adil. And also, I think, Mathews, what we are talking about, and clearly there is a mixed and a controversial legacy, but it also needs honest appraisal. And there is a view that Pravin Gordhan served the capital class well. And also, it would be interesting to see from labor, from unions, to see what sort of responses labor unions would give, and particularly those who suffered and continue to suffer under the Gordhan years, when he was the public enterprises minister to job losses, and Ashraf just alluded to a number of jobs now being lost. And we've seen that because, again, if we know that Pravin Gordhan, spoke out against the Gupta-style state capture, but there is a view that there was a more sophisticated form of capture that benefited the privileged business establishment at the expense of labor.
Yeah, no, thanks. So, Pravin Gordhan was never Minister of Communications. He's never been responsible for for Post Office or for the Post Bank. The Post Office and the Post Bank have never fallen under the Department of Public Enterprises. There were 7 SOEs which fell under public enterprises. The Post Office and the Post Bank fall under the Department of Communications. So Pravin was never Minister of Communications. So yes, I agree, the Post Office, the Post Bank is a tragedy. But let's hold those ministers who have been responsible for communications accountable. Pravin was never Minister of Communications. That's a simple fact. So that's neither here nor there. Look, it's interesting to say that he inherited a 5% economic growth rate. He was not president of the country in 2009. We know who the president of the country was in 2009. There's a certain chap called Jacob Zuma who now leads the MK party. I think colleagues you might know. I think there's a colleague here who was at a recent MK party event. So let's not be neutral. Well, we're not neutral. I'm not neutral. I'm an ANC member. But I'm not going to pretend to be neutral when I'm a member of MK. We're in a mess today for many reasons. Part of the reason why we're in a mess is because we had a decade of state capture. And I don't think we can underestimate that. I'm not sure how is that dishonest to say we're in a crisis when billions of rands were stolen from our trains, from ESCOM, PRASA, Transnet, the Post Office, the Post Bank, SABC, municipalities across the state. That's a mathematical fact. We're in a mess because of that. We are in a mess, I agree with that deal, also because of and I think it was Adil said it. I agree as well. When the economy is bleeding, the Treasury is wrong to simply think we can resolve the economy stumbling along by cutting expenditure. That doesn't make sense. You've got to grow the economy. You've got to fund public service, which the economy depends upon, whether it's businesses, whether it's ordinary consumers or society at large. So that's where we do have a disagreement with Treasury. But I think we should also be fair as well that when we had a 2008 economic global crisis, when we lost 1 million jobs almost overnight, in 2009 when Jacob Zuma became president, Pravin was Minister of Finance, government did unleash quite a bold stimulus plan. Obviously, it didn't make as much progress as we'd wanted to because of other complicated issues. But I don't think we should simply say, no, look, we condemn him because of 1, 2, and 3. I think there's many things that he has done well. And I think today we claim those victories. Unless you can tell me that social grants fell from the sky, unless you can say that basic education with free meals fell from the sky, and all those things. If you look at how the predecessor to the SARS, the Inland Revenue Service and the Customs and Excise Office were run before Pravin became Commissioner of SARS in 1999, they were chalk and cheese compared to what we have today. And even then, there was real battles. Part of the reason why some people were purged out of SARS is because SARS, following Pravin's legacy, was holding all politicians accountable to say you must pay your taxes. And when they stepped on some powerful toes, then yes, we know what happened to Ivan Play and others. So we're not saying Pravin is perfect. He wasn't. I don't think diplomacy was his natural forte. We were also frustrated at ESCOM as well. We were frustrated at Transnet too. But I think we do appreciate coming in to clean up somebody else's mess, and a devastating, devastating mess. But let's leave aside a moment. We're not looking for friends here. We're not saying anybody must have Pravin as your bedside table photo. But the fact is today, we've not had load shedding for 5 months. The fact is today, SAA is flying once again. The fact is today, Transnet is stabilized. At least we hope it's stabilized. We'll see some improvements, etc. But some of these issues also are far more complicated than a simple politician, because politicians are not superhumans. Not that we must put them on a pedestal, we mustn't. We must hold them even in contempt at time, that's natural. But when you have cable theft crippling ESCOM, Transnet, Metro Rail, when you have the levels of internal corruption at ESCOM, where coal suppliers milk ESCOM left, right, and center, or there's even collusion within inside ESCOM too. When you've had, a regional manager of Metro Rail involved in the sale of cable theft. So my point is then, is that these things are difficult. They go much deeper than any minister, and I think it's also dangerous to simply put a minister on a pedestal as if they're superhuman, because this is what's going to get us into trouble. Because ultimately, all of us as society have got a responsibility to try to fix the system, and not just to wait for government to fix it for us.
Matthew, okay, thank you very much for that. Ashraf, just a response in terms of what Matthew is obviously saying. And, he mentioned the post office, he spoke about SAA. Thank you, SAA is actually flying again. But again, there are certain scars on the legacy of Pravin Gordhan. If we look at SAA, for example, as well, and when one looks at all arguments, moral arguments, against state capture, we talk about management or mismanagement as well. At the end of the day, perhaps he may not have been directly involved, even as finance minister, but at the end of the day, he was overall, he managed the finances of the country. He was there, obviously, to get the loans from the likes of the IMF, from the World Bank, to bail out these state-owned enterprises as well. So putting all of this together, and again, I want to come back to the point in terms of the Gupta era versus the era of Pravin Gordhan, and again, this whole sophisticated form of state capture that had benefited what we call the privileged business establishment under Pravin Gordhan.
Yes, remember we have an integrated government. that follows what is called the National Development Plan 2030. The NDP talks about pursuing a democratic developmental state. And once you're in cabinet, managing, whether you're managing a department of public enterprises or communications or transport, there is what is called integrated government. And so where there are gaps in different institutions, it's about knowledge management and sharing. And much more could have been done. Today, most of the SOEs are collapsed, and particularly service delivery functions. Let's reflect on the very darkest scar of Minister Gordhan's legacy, and that's SAA. And when one reflects and dissects the SAA case, we see a minister who, despite having so many decades of experience in government, does not understand corporate governance. And throughout his tenure as Minister of Public Enterprises, he's micromanaged, particularly of Eskom, Transnet, and SAA, those three enterprises. He has overlooked and not complied with governance. Interference by a minister at board level and even at management level are the very critiques that we've had of the state capture Zuma years. So the very criticism that was directed at the Jacob Zuma years, and rightly so, this was reproduced by Minister Gordhan, especially at Eskom, especially at Transnet, and especially at SAA. And therefore, that legacy, as we dissect it and reflect on it, will be a very dark scar. The SAA privatization debacle goes even further, showing contempt of parliament, contempt of parliamentary committees, interference of functions of a director general. And that is not efficiency. That is a wanton lack of appreciation of good governance and fiduciary duties. And it's well documented. The very fact that we must remember that in the very early days, when his first stint as finance minister, Minister Gordhan brought in an American called Coleman Andrews to run SAA. And Coleman Andrews used to run Bain. And Bain was the company that actually was the centerpiece, the poster child of state capture in terms of consultancy firms that managed to hollow out the state. And the package that he was given to walk away was 200 million, unheard of at that point in time. So there is a track record, there's a pattern that we must be very sober about and is deeply concerning. And these things feed into subsequent administrations, from the third administration, from the fourth administration, into the Zuma years, and now into the Ramaphosa years. I think all of that speaks to a pattern of lack of appreciation of governance, and that culminates in the SAA Takatso debacle, which has been reported extensively, and particularly going to the DBSA, which is meant to be a bank for infrastructure, to raise resources, scarce funding, infrastructure funding for an airline, and then shareholders that are part of competitors. That's not acting in the national interest. I think those are all for public record. And yes, he has been competent, but competent, what are the outcomes? I think the SAA is the darkest scar. And we must also be mindful around the purging of black managers. That's another story altogether. And then overlooking the record of Narrator, who has been completely incompetent. That brings in other dimensions. And I think those, we must just be frank and honest. Why, how did this come about? And the results we see today, 0.5% growth rate, a decline in economic growth and mass retrenchments, one needs to reflect soberly about it. But that doesn't take away that he has made his contributions in the past, but one must look at it SOE by SOE empirically and scientifically, because we all got nothing to gain for unwanted criticism Our role as public analysts is to provide a fair and sober analysis of the track record of all ministers.
Yes, Adil, in fact, I'm sure you wanted to obviously respond to some of the issues that Matthew had actually brought up as well, and particularly looking at Pravin Gordhan, and Matthew spoke about the Zuma era as well, the Gupta era, and we know there was this relationship that was soured between Jacob Zuma and Pravin Gordhan, and as a result, he was sacked as well. But also just to understand that relationship during the Zuma era versus the relationship he's had during the Ramaphosa era, because we know that Pravin Gordhan was extremely close to Cyril Ramaphosa.
Yeah, I think maybe let's clear out this misunderstanding. Pravin was a Zuma guy from the onset. There was never, ever a time where Pravin became a minister in the government of South Africa until when the president, former President Jacob Zuma, appointed him to being a member of cabinet. Before, he was not in cabinet. So let's be clear, he was a Zuma guy in and out. They had a fallout at some point when the ideological disconnection happened. And I know, I mean, Matthew did reflect that, for instance, some of my views might be influenced by the fact that I have affiliation with MK. No, I'm talking as an analyst. I'm not talking from a political point of view of anything. My views are purely on what I know, and I've studied and I research and I specialize in on a regular basis. And the other thing is the whole state capture was a very strange, and we still find it to be an extremely strange phenomena in South African politics, given the fact that state capture is only referred to when it singles out particular individuals, families and individuals, and is used as a means to shut down a political dialogue of really transforming South Africa and moving it to the point where we want to see it. And it's conveniently used to block that dialogue, to say, no, if we allow Black people to be in power, you will end up with state capture because Black people by nature will steal and pillage and be corrupt, etc. When we look at the state capture, and even former judge president in terms of the Constitutional Court, he himself was presented evidence of major companies and corporations that were involved in South Africa's state capture, to the point where we're even talking about pre-apartheid, during apartheid times, post-apartheid, and after apartheid. But what did the commission do? Conveniently, they refused to listen to anything that was pre-post-democratic South Africa. And then they omitted a lot of submitted evidence of individuals and companies and multinationals, as well as major corporations that were involved in enjoying what we call the evergreen contracts, the everlasting supplies to the monopoly of cash, capital, monopoly on banking, monopoly on economy, monopoly on resources, monopoly on all of those things. But what we ended up with is almost a witch hunt, a list of people that must be literally circled into a block, put up as poster people who are faces of corruption. So I really don't, I don't entertain much about the whole state capture, outcome. I really have reserved views about the finality of state capture in terms of its authenticity. Because if we say state capture, we must look at everything. Who is enjoying this economy of South Africa? Who has been the most primary beneficiaries, and who has been the most drivers of economic power? When we start looking at that, people like myself are expecting this thing from an investment banking background and others. We know where the money is hidden. We know who controls the economy. The names that were piloted and the people that were targeted and were given as an outcome, who were referred to as enablers, as well as people participating in state capture, they have nothing. They don't own companies. They don't own industries. They don't own manufacturing. They don't own anything. They don't have mines. They have literally nothing, which we could even refer to for state capture. And the state was captured in that era. Yet, when these people were removed from state capture, we still see the continuation of a similar pattern. They didn't even literally impact on any single level of economic growth or trajectory of how South Africa's wealth has been distributed. So I think the whole element of that 9 wasted years, they are lying about it. Nobody in the 9 wasted years was not present, from President Cyril Ramaphosa, Pravin Gordhan was part of it, big man and a big supporter. He was a Zuma man, Pravin Gordhan. Coming back into the current excuses that have been used about Eskom. I mean, I just read an article where on the headline it says, Neeshan Bolton says that we have the lights today in Eskom as it was due to the legacy of Pravin Gordhan. That is not the truth. It was the legacy of Prime Minister Pravin Gordhan that we suffered load shedding. These are the truth that we must tell our people, and we mustn't be shy about it. And we mustn't be literally economic about some of this truth. When they started restructuring Eskom and doing structural adjustment programs in order to make sure that Eskom should be privatized, we suffered the worst part of load shedding from the period of 2018 leading up to 2024. Those were the facts on the table. That was when the minister was the Minister of Public Enterprise at the time and was in charge of Eskom. And they even clashed heads as to what should be the priorities between the Minister of Mantashe on minerals and energy, as well as when it comes to the public enterprises. There was always a shareholders clashes as well as a mandate issues and stuff. But you could see some of these things are so glaringly blatant that, yes, we would like to see a gleamy picture, a glorious picture of a person who contributed immensely. We wonderfully accept that. But there were problems and there were mistakes made in the process. And Pravin Gordhan did not become the angel that we want to present him to be. There's quite a lot of problems that they created, whether it was SAA, it was to do with all of these things. If South Africa wants to start giving us, sort of saint figures, they must go look, first of all, what was the criteria and criteria that qualified a person to reach the state or status of a sainthood. In this current administration, none of them are saints. None of them can even qualify. They had fallouts with each other, given the previous years that they've been serving. And you know how political squabbles are settled. You have to tarnish the image of another. So the 9 wasted years was another campaign. The state capture, whoever held on to it, was another campaign. I mean, we have in the 9 wasted years the document called the National Development Plan, which was crafted by the same ministers. Pravin Gordhan was part of it. Nobody talks about that legacy of it, to say South Africa had something that they could have held on to, which is the National Development Plan, which was developed then at the time from the process whereby former Minister of Treasury, I think Trevor Manuel, was part of the people who were compiling that project, and as well as the plan during the presidency of Jacob Zuma. Post that, it got stretched as if there was no legacy that existed prior to that. So, South Africa and the politicians, they are very extremely disappointing, because when it's convenient to lie, they will turn against you and lie and tell you a version of something that they were part of, but they removed themselves surgically out of the responsibilities of what happened in that whole time. So I find it incredibly disappointing, to say the least, on some of the views that some of the ministers, some of the executives that were participating in that time could even use such excuses. In another time, we could visit these things properly and start becoming very strong in dissecting them. But some of these claims that are given, I know the ANC has to save face and stand behind some of the cadres and really say these are people who served. Yes, Pravin Gordhan served his time and legacy. If you could recall, by the way, Thabo Mbeki, in his time, during the president of the ANC, warned against political careerism. But yet we see the same things that they are against is the same thing that some of these legacies have produced. Political careerism. 30 years of political careerism, and there was nothing wrong. Why? Because you're part of the inner circle and the elite. But others must not be encouraged to become political careerists. Why? Because they are not supposed to be in the inner circle, elitist, corners, as well as preferred individuals. And I'm not talking to you from a point of saying I'm spiteful or whatever. No, I'm just giving you various facts. I know Pravin Gordhan very closely. I know him very well. And I had projects as well as campaigns at times that we actually had to interact and stuff like that. So I know him on a one-on-one basis, and some of these things. We disagreed in other things. I agreed with him on many other things. But on the basis that they created this monster image of, state capture and everything, they're lying to people. State capture is captured by major multinationals and corporations and the vested interests that are controlling minerals and resources in South Africa, and that are the de facto decision makers, particularly people who are even controlling currently the Reserve Bank and others. So if we want to talk about the economy, let's be serious and sensible. Let's not talk nonsense that is just going to lead us into doldrums. The real issues of South Africa is about the distribution of the wealth. These politicians should have played a role in ensuring that South Africa's today is enjoying the redistribution of the wealth and the value that South Africa is supposed to be worth, not an economy that is currently in tatters, in current destruction, not an economy where you have the black people still remain the most poorest and the most disadvantaged and the most disempowered, where we have to live. Majority of our people are living in squalor, are living in townships, are living in shanty town communities, have no jobs, are currently suffering all forms of illnesses, have no education, have no skills and everything. So when we start talking about those things, there is no one in a political phase that must really rise to take any glory for a political contribution, because we have not solved the problems and the ills of South Africa as a society. And unfortunately, as I said, by saying that, a cadre who started off in the socialist communist ranks, gradually moving away from that ideological base of saying we are going to distribute and share the wealth, to a point where it became an elitist society and a group of individuals that enjoyed power and were able to command a great deal of that power, but not for the sake of the masses and the people of South Africa, but for an exclusive elite few in society. And that should give you a picture. When the markets went into a almost riot for the first time in South Africa, when the president decided that he's going to be removing a minister, and then suddenly we have an uproar from so-called markets, which are not even voters. They're not even, they contribute to the economic, investment, but they had an uproar to say, you cannot make that decision because this is our selected handman that we want, and we are wanting to continue in that role. Whoever you place in there does not qualify because has not been vetted and has not been given a go-ahead from us. That should have told us a story, that we are sitting with a problem in South Africa that it will take us some years. We have not even yet solved it. The markets are still in control, even given the fact of the GNU today, that the government of national unity was a government which was actually hand-signaled in terms of this is agreeable by the markets itself. They said they would not have a scenario whereby the EFF, the MK, and the other smaller progressive parties can form a government and they will give it support. So we cannot lie about facts. That South Africa, unfortunately, with the current caliber of ministers, Minister Pravin Gordhan was part of the problem of creating the elitist society that was able to engage and encourage private capital to dominate over the lives of ordinary South Africans and take over the economy at the same time. We are not enjoying the distribution of this economy today, and we would wish to do that as African people, to have a share and equity in it. Ashraf made a very good point and a mention of the fact that there was a huge slaughter of black executives and professionals during the same era, encouraged by who? The same ministers who we're talking about. So, let's be factual about some of these things. I know it's tough, it's a difficult time. We've come out of a very difficult period. Losing a human being is a difficult thing. May the soul and really the spirit of Pravin Gordhan rest in peace and hopefully find peace. But the environment where we are in is some of these things that they have left behind for us have created far much more bigger problems for us to solve into the future. Ahmed Katharada Foundation, let me give you a secret. I was one of those that actually started it and founded it in Lenasia when I was part of the ANC in terms of the executive committee within the Lenasia environment, and we formulated the foundation and we deployed Neeshan Bolton to the Ahmed Katharada Foundation. So the current Ahmed Katharada Foundation cannot be used and be actually now made into a spear that is targeting certain individuals and refusing to look at the broader problem of South Africa's problem of poverty. We have huge issues of poverty, and the issues that I know Ahmed Katharada and what he lived for. He would have not been happy in his life to see that the majority of people are still suffering and are not looked after, and the foundation is used as a means to fight battles that are non-related to improving the lives of South Africans. So, the life of Pravin Gordhan, his individual life, how he tried to show his example was great. I was on a flight with him at some point where he decided, because he wanted to lead by example, when he was introducing the structural reforms of cutting down budget and making sure there's no wastages, he booked into a commercial flight, which was an ordinary retail flight, and he didn't go into business class. He went into ordinary class. That was a remarkable feat. That was something amazing. I enjoyed that, to see out of a leader walking out of ordinary, common class, not business class, not special and everything, and walking through the airport, being part of the normal society. So those are some of the beautiful things that you could stand up and say, you know what, Pravin Gordhan stood up for some of the things that made us shine. He didn't live an ostentatious life. He had a similar house, the house that he had in Waterkloof. He lived with his family, his children used to go to schools, ordinary or not, doesn't matter. And he tried to retain a certain level of composure, but there was still money, which is wealth, in the amount of wealth which was accumulated, which was rumored that they had acquired and accumulated and was taken offshore and other things. That's one other aspect, and this evidence was brought forward. So we can't pretend that certain things do not exist because I'm a lovable personality. People like me, but they want to overlook some of my faults. So I'm just sharing some of these things that we shouldn't be caught up emotionally. But the issues of South Africa are not created by Pravin, we're not created by Jacob Zuma, we're not created by Cyril Ramaphosa. We're created by the lackluster, lethargic leadership that emerged afterwards, that forgot the importance and the role that they occupied in power in order to liberate the common man and the ordinary man, because the voters vote for you to make their lives better.
Thank you for that, Adil. Mathews, just to bring in, I know you're switching off your video for the balance of the discussion, but we've got about 15 minutes or so we will obviously continue. Mathews, just looking at from what Adil is saying, and I've been listening to Ashraf as well, it is clear that when we're discussing the legacy of an individual like the former minister, like Pravin Gordhan, but there's just so much more that one can actually read into what is being said, what is being discussed tonight, and what is being unpacked. And again, I think that what we are seeing is a bigger picture emerging in terms of we've got a problem. We've got a systematic problem in this country that would impact on individuals like Pravin Gordhan, on individuals that in a negative way and in a positive way as well. But again, when we're talking about this legacy of Pravin Gordhan, and we're looking at some of the impact it's had on him personally as an individual, as a result of a system that has gone wrong or a system that has not addressed the issues.
Yeah, no, thanks. Look, I mean, let's, as the deal said, let's stick to facts. The fact was when days were dark under apartheid, Pravin stood up, made his contribution for a democratic state. When he moved into a democratic state, he was called upon to build SARS, and he built SARS into the anchor of the transformation agenda that all presidents since 1994 have been able to enjoy and to use to deliver basic services and countless other services to millions of working class families. When he was asked to play a role in finance, to respond to the global economic crisis of 2008, he did that role. And when he could see that under Jacob Zuma's leadership, the current leader of MK, or the new leader of MK, that the nation was being sold, being betrayed, state capture and corruption being unleashed on steroids, he wasn't a coward. He stood up, whilst other ministers who now find their home in MK were willing to sell their souls to the devil. Pravin continued to play that role, even when he had to clean up the mess of the people who broke ESCOM and Transit and SDA. All of Zuma's friends, Pravin was willing to make that effort to do it. And I think I'm glad Adil is admitting he's a member of MK, because he introduced himself as a neutral analyst. That's not true. There's nothing wrong with being an MK member. You've got the right to be an MK member. Just own it. It's on Twitter. Don't deny it and then say, well, I'm an independent analyst, because you're not. And we get why Adil has to defend the state capture project, because that is MK's legacy. That is Jacob Zuma's legacy. The Zondo Commission, that is Jacob Zuma's Bible. And that's why Zuma's entire parliamentary list, if he's not changing every other day, is the Zondo accused, left, right, and center, all of them. the architects of state capture. So I get why Adil wants to whitewash, to minimize, to poo-poo, to deny, to deflect, to divert the state capture project. The reality is for workers, we have felt the pinch. SAA workers lost their jobs. SA Express workers lost their jobs. The entire economy bled because of the state capture project. It'll be very strange for state capture to be unleashed on steroids and somehow to think the day after, nothing happened. We can go back to business as usual. The damage is deep. It took decades to build Eskom, Transat, SCA, etc. And yet, the leader of MK, in a moment of madness, decided to destroy it. And it's going to take us time to rebuild it. Some things will never be rebuilt. SA Express is gone. Mango is gone. That's MK's legacy. And so I'm glad Adil was helped to found the Ahmed Katharada Foundation. He might recall what Ahmed Katharada said in his final letter to a certain Jacob Zuma, and said he must stand down because of what he had done to the nation. But look, we get it. There's politics. People are excited. They want to deflect from their own legacies. They want to poo-poo issues. No problem. That's a democratic. You have got the right in a democracy. But when the history judges, history will judge favorably upon Pravin Gordhan, and history won't judge favorably upon persons who led the nation to state capture. That they won't do.
Thank you for that, Matthew. Ashraf,
Just maybe,
okay,
Ashraf,
Adil,
just maybe to make a quick correction. MK didn't exist during state capture period. MK is a fairly recent political party, and I became a member of it, seeing the wrongs as well as the loss of trajectory policy direction, that our people are no longer centered to politics, are actually now used as byproducts of politics. So you cannot say MK is the beneficiary party of state capture because it was not existent during state capture time. If we have to talk state capture and we say there is an existing reality of state capture, then state capture will be a product of the ANC. It will not be on the square and be given a label of MK. No, that is wrong. It was a product of the ANC, COSATU, as well as SACP and its alliance, which Matthew Parks belongs to in the alliance structures and formations and the unions. So if they believe that the state was captured by the few individuals that the report actually highlighted, then they were part of the beneficiary of state capture. But to put it on the road of MK, it actually doesn't make any sense because it didn't exist. MK didn't exist at the time. MK existed today as a political party, which we are part of and which I have never even denied. I'm a member of the MK. I had said it openly, publicly to many people. And I was one of the very strong, quietly founding people when MK was started. I was behind in the scenes, and because I was fed up with what I saw happening in the ANC, in the neglect of the ordinary voters, and the constituency that made and gave ANC the political power that it enjoys. So to blame MK and to say that as an independent analyst, when I analyze issues, I am actually infiltrated by political ideology. No, it's wrong. Being an expert in what I do, I have an independent opinion and voice, and it's not because of a political affiliation. Just as much as Matthew Parks is not talking here as an analyst or impact on the basis of a political, ideological viewpoint. We all have independent views. We all have our political homes and affiliation. But when it comes to the reality of truth, MK should not even receive any blame because it is a movement that was just created in December that came to life and was able to wrestle political power and enjoy political dominance. No, state capture is not even an MK project, and it's not even close to MK. It didn't exist during MK. The beneficiaries of state capture are all in the ANC. Today, as we speak, those that were blamed were people that were actually given a shifting of the blame and used as scapegoats because the money which happened during the level of state capture and even still protecting the major industries and the multinationals are still people who are sitting within the ANC. So we shouldn't be lying to each other about state capture and how people started owning the so-called narrative of state capture. Because at the time when we recall state capture happening, Pravin Gordhan was still alive and was part of the state capture project. And he was involved at the time when the state capture, we are told about Eskom, we are told about SOEs, all of these things, which was the time when Pravin Gordhan was still part of the ministries, which means the state capture findings should have actually reflected his participation. I can recall you two things. Mitsubishi Hitachi contracts, which were awarded at the time. Mitsubishi Hitachi built the state, ESCOM at the time, to 450 plus billion. Who was the Minister of Treasury at the time? It was Minister Pravin Gordhan. He was giving what we call, extending of scope and scope creep and all of the other things, and they were allowing for this money to be paid up. So what are we talking about now? Some of these things we can't lie about the facts. And as fortunate with a person like me who knows the facts and understands the analytical elements of it. But we're not vicious, facetious people who are not going to come out and say, no, because of this person is an individual like this, we're going to say nasty things. No. The project of state capture is a misleading project in South Africa. And the minute South Africans and Africans wake up to tell each other that, listen, we're being diverted from the truth of our economy and the resources and the wealth. The mineral owners are never being held as responsible. People who supply all of the goods in South Africa are never held responsible as state capturers. People who enjoy draconian contracts that are going for over 50 years today, plus have been extended to almost 80 years, have never been touched. The owners of capital, banks, insurance companies, you're talking about the funds, people who are administrating some of these investment management funds, people who are running the economy of South Africa, people who are controlling the stock exchange, none of them ever feature when it comes to minute level of state capture. So I don't buy the story of state capture. I still tell you openly that we have made a mistake in the narrow part of state capture. It needs to be expanded and it needs to be looked at it from its full totality. What are we talking about when we say state capture? Because the individuals that are in the report did not capture any state. They have nothing.
Yes, Ashraf, just to bring you into the discussion now, one cannot ignore perceptions and public perceptions, public sentiments. And I know Matthew alluded to this in terms of X and Twitter. But it is clear that statistics, numbers speak for themselves. Of around 500,000 or more than 70% of social media posts about the late former minister, Pravin Gordhan, are negative. And only 7% is positive, but one cannot ignore that because these are perceptions. This is what you and I, this is what the man in the street is actually thinking about at this point in time. The second issue here is we all speak highly of Pravin Gordhan as far as the SARS Commission is concerned. And Adil alluded to Hitachi. You spoke about the 200 million payout to Coleman, SAA, and turning SARS into a world-class revenue collection mechanism. But when it comes to spending, it was just totally out of control. And Hitachi is an example. The payment to Coleman is an example, and there are many, many more. And being the Minister of Treasury, obviously, one needs to control the purse strings. Is this obviously not one of the legacies of Pravin Gordhan, where he had absolutely no control on how the money that he generated through a world-class organization like SARS, how that money was spent?
Yes, as I indicated at the beginning, as analysts, we need to take a scientific and empirical approach. And also, when you have different perspectives, as we have today on the panel, I definitely take a balanced approach, one that looks at the public interest, the public good, rooted in the National Development Plan. And when we use the National Development Plan, because that has what is called monitoring and evaluation and outcomes, and we apply that lens to any minister, we will, through a scientific and empirical process, get differing outcomes. And the case with ex-Minister Gordhan, firstly, again, we must reiterate that he was a comrade and he played a significant role in democracy building, in non-racialism, and in public service. That is rock solid and that is commendable. We are analyzing now his track record as the minister in the last administration, which has unfortunately been his Achilles heel. Matthew is right, Adil is right. He should have not taken that position, age-wise, etc. Nonetheless, the record has been horrifying. And I mean horrifying, especially first and foremost for the economy, because when you're dealing with infrastructure, particularly energy and transport, which is the foundation of any modern economy. You must know that the management and governance of those institutions are vital for economic, not understanding governance, SOE governance, not understanding fiduciary duties, not understanding appointment of board members and interference in senior executive decisions, which is what the minister actually did over many years, especially in Transnet and Eskom, the underinvestment in Transnet. And now, during the COVID years, because very little has been written about the COVID years except by one or two professors, such as Professor Stephen Friedman. But when you look at the COVID years, particularly the lockdown era, during that era, under the cover of the national emergency regulations and lockdowns, some of the most draconian neoliberal policies were cooked and implemented under the cover of COVID. That period in 2020-21, South Africa took an IMF loan of 500 billion, of which the bulk of it has been mismanaged. It's for the public record. And therefore, a lot of people that take the middle way, as I do, we view that the Jacob Zuma and Gupta years and the Ramaphosa, Pravin Gordhan years are actually two sides of the same coin. They are inextricably linked. And it is a continuation of the suboptimal governance of the ANC and the alliance partners. And the ANC and the alliance partners, like COSATU and SACP, must take equal blame for the suboptimal performance that we citizens see and face. And therefore, today we have a government of national unity because precisely of this two sides of the same coin, same old behavior. And none of them is worse and none of them is better. And I think history will record this. And we look at now, we're now caught between a rock and a hard place. You look at Eskom, we've just passed the Electricity Regulation Act, which is going to move towards privatization. At the same time, NERSA is going to jack up utility prices at 15-20%. Ordinary citizens will not survive. You will end up paying electricity costs in a few years' time as you would be paying off a home loan. The utility is no more public good. And this government and the unions have all endorsed it. COSATU has endorsed the Electricity Regulation Act. They've endorsed private-public partnerships. Look at Transnet, private-public partnerships. The state, your taxpayers' money is going to be invested in rail infrastructure. Some costs the taxpayer pays, and then we, DPE, Ministry of Public Enterprises, introduce private-public partnerships. So private providers can just come in and offer services and lease it, increasing the utility prices of access to rail infrastructure, increasing the cost of goods and services. Is that a developmental state? And then the kind of, within deregulation, the kind of deals that get struck are all secretive deals. Is that the vision of the National Development Plan, which talks of a democratic development state rooted in good governance? No. And therefore, I'll be emphatic. The Zuma years and Zupta years and the Ramaphosa years with Pravin Gordhan et al. Are the same. They are two sides of the same coin. They are neither better than each other, neither are they worse than each other. They have brought South Africa into this mess that we're in today. And it's disingenuous for colleagues that are pro one party and against the other to then try and compare and contrast these two legacies. They're the same. You must remember President Ramaphosa was deputy president from 2014. From 2014, he was deputy president. So it's a continuation. And it's just a matter of different fractions of the elites that are going for the public good. and therefore we have the GNU today. Everyone must take responsibility for the GNU, or everyone in the so-called alliance must take responsibility for the current outcomes that we have today. As they say in politics, we all must learn to eat humble pie. And I think today the ANC and the alliance are eating humble pie when you have a DA, the minority government, that can really, at only 20% of the electorate, can show them that we will be the new boss in the GNU. And they're showing it, whether it's the Bella Bill and all these other kinds of legislation. Such a small minority party is just basically treating them as the headmaster. It's quite sad, but they must all learn to eat humble pie today.
Well, so shukran for that. I see we are obviously heading towards the end of the broadcast, and I'm going to go around very, very quickly, starting with you, Matthew. In about 2 minutes, just some final thoughts.
Yeah, no, thanks. Look, thanks for an interesting debate. I think it's just good to stick to a bit of facts. So you blame Pravin for Coleman Andrews SCA. Coleman Andrews was there in 2001. Pravin was at SARS that time. You blame him for Eskom Itachi. Well, he was still at SARS at 2007. The IMF loan was not 500 billion rand. Ashraf, it was 70 billion rand out of a debt of 5 trillion. COSATU, did we oppose the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act? Yes, we did. We just Google searched. Just go to PMG. We made submissions to both National Assembly, NCOP, publicly, at NEDLAC. So I think it's good for academics just to do a little bit of research. And the Bella Bill actually is not a bill anymore, Ashraf. It's an act passed by the president. Signed by the president. So I think it's good to have views, and I'm glad Adil says he doesn't believe state capture occurred. That's the thesis of MK. We respect his right to have views. And, people have the right to have views. They don't have to be based on fact. If you go to polls most full of innocent people, MK will claim they're innocent, but we all know the truth. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Adil, 2 minutes.
Look, I think my 2 minutes, I agree when we talk about facts with Matthew Parks that, look, when Hitachi and Mitsubishi were appointed was after 2010. So from 2011, that's when the Power Build program started. And that was the time when Minister Pravin Gordhan was actually the Minister of Treasury at the time. So we all agree, because that was just soon after the coming out of the Polokwane conference when, former President Jacob Zuma won and was actually instated thereafter. And he reinstituted the cabinet, etc. So, in terms of who was who and the facts are there, I know the facts and I know what I'm talking about. So it's not the made-up fact, So let's talk practically. Look, individuals in their own personal capacity live and try their best to leave a great legacy. And yes, Pravin Gordhan tried his best, and he lived his life in the simplest form that I know, and I can appreciate the fact that he lived very frugally, very simple, very decent, and a human being. But there were other issues in the process. There were the fact that we didn't advance, during his era and time, the agenda for nation building, which was the rainbow nation that we wanted to see. And that is why you're seeing currently the existence of the Indian cabal in power, which was the people who came from the Indian National Congress that have never lost their roots and connection to the clan and the tribal affinity towards being of a different particular race from being African. And that has continued and still continues. So, those are the kind of mistakes that should have been avoided then and should have not carried on into the new democratic dispensation, which is today. There were other issues of the oversight issues on really the whole structure, whether from the last 30 years, did the ministers do well? And Minister Pravin Gordhan was very prominent. I explained to you that when they started government, when he headed what we call the TEC, the Transitional Executive Council at the time, which was to build South Africa and to build the constitution, etc., etc. There were many things that should have been done and could have been done. But overall, his life was lived for the purpose of saving South Africa and South Africans, and he's performed his role. He's rested, gracefully, peacefully. And we pray and we wish that, in the hereafter, that we would all be raised in a better state for everyone. But again, as a society, we should not shy away from holding each other accountable, because that's how a democratic state operates. If it was a dictatorial state, I would be afraid to tell the truth, because if my truth was to offend and insult people, then I will be actually held, and almost even be executed or be killed, like Plato and the others, who actually lived as philosophers. So we have a democratic state for that reason, and there were individuals, Pravin Gordhan was part of them, who really built this, institutional structures that enable that we can speak freely today and we can be really enjoying the democracies that we're enjoying. The only flaws we are currently blaming on individuals is their inability to have transformed the economy for the benefit of the masses. And that is where we're saying that a lot should be done and a lot needs to be done, irrespective of political color and t-shirt color. South Africa and South Africans deserve better than what we have, and we need to make sure that the future leaders, if they don't want to be criticized by Twitter after passing on and moving on in their life, they must start being conscious of their responsibility towards the citizens and towards the voters and the people who give them the power that they enjoy today. Or else you would pass on and they will really go for you with a flag, because that's when they don't hold back. They can speak freely because there's no fear for any, backlash of anything. So it's sad to have seen social media's majority of social media, whether it's Twitter or social media on Facebook and other platforms, that review, and the fact that there was a celebratory mood for the passing away of a soul and a comrade and the people who do it. But it has its own roots in some of the things that they found disagreeable in a person's life. The same could happen to me. I could pass on and people feel that they are upset and unhappy about my behavior on certain issues of national importance. So we ought to all be, as leaders, conscious of our role. What we do in the public space is not going to go unnoticed, and not everybody's going to sit there and clap for us and give us sainthood status and praise for us when we have done certain things wrong and when we have not looked after the interests of the poor particularly, and the most misfortunate and mistreated in society. And I don't think South Africans feel the same with regards to the contribution made by Pravin Gordhan towards alleviating the lives of the poor. And if that was the case, he would have been celebrated today on social media and Twitter and other platforms. Because they are feeling the disgust as well as the unhappiness, they were just in a democratic mood vocalizing it. So do not hold them, in contempt for anything. There's no breaking of laws, speaking out your mind. We must practice what we preach. If we are critical and we are giving a proper analysis of critique, we must not be blinded by being favoritist of something or somebody. We must be open. During the ESCOM days of the minister's last days, in the last 6 years, there was a big mess up. ESCOM nearly collapsed. If it was not for the sake of civil societies standing up and people like us who spoke very fiercely against how ESCOM was being led into the ditches, when even the former CEO, Andre de Ruyter, says that this is a dying horse and there's no way they're going to resurrect it. We said, no, that's not the case. ESCOM could be resurrected within 6 months. It took this year, from this year before the election, for ESCOM to take a turnaround to be improved. So some of these things, we should not claim victories, where there is no victories. We should not tell lies, and we should not. Amilcar Cabral said it better. We should not claim easy victories, and we should not tell lies. There were problems in the process of this democracy, and these problems still exist. And unfortunately, some particular individuals played a role in this creation of these problems. And today they want to be isolated from the problem and being given status of sainthood. None of them are saints in this case, and I'm just giving my own honest opinion. And I thank you for the opportunity for being open, and we can speak in a critical manner without actually being labeled this or that.
Thank you for that, Adil. Ashraf, just final thought from you.
Thank you. Just to respond factually, during the COVID years, there were 2 loans from the IMF. In July 2020, Minister Mboweni signed off 500 billion. And the following year, Matthew, 2021, was the 70 billion. And these 2 loans have been the most mismanaged in South Africa's history, all under the period of New Dawn. And I think that is a sobering reflection. In fact, billion rand per billion rand, the COVID era and the mismanagement of vaccines and that entire procurement system, more money was wasted and corrupted than the entire state capture years. So that's quite sobering, and one can do the figures and calculate, and you'll be able to see the scope and scale of the COVID years. presided by the previous administration. What is quite interesting and contradictory, we talk about Bain, we talk about SAA. Bain was cited in the Zondo Commission as being one of those consultancy firms that enabled state capture. Yet Minister Gordhan himself reappointed Bain in 2022-23 to do the restructuring, the new business model for SAA. So what does that talk to? Where were the lessons of the Zondo Commission? His ministry paid Bain 149 million rand in consultancy fees to do the new business model for SAA, which recommended privatization. So were there any learnings from the Zondo Commission? Was Bain then an instrument to repurpose the new generation SAA for privatization, meaning job losses? These are critical questions we need to ask. And I think we need to be sober and we need to analyze each SOE, whether it be Denel. We haven't even discussed Denel. We haven't discussed other SOEs, EXA, etc. But there we go. Today we have a state that's underperforming. We have a government of national unity. Yes, the Bella Bill was signed, but the two critical clauses were frozen. Is that democracy? The sixth administration, democratic government, passed the Bella Bill by the assembly. And yet, today, the minority party says, no, they can hold a gun to the head of majority rule and say, we're not happy with this clause, either you take it out or else. And this is what's happening. You have effectively a minority government. And where was COSATU? Where were the unions during the Electricity Regulation Act that is talking about privatization? Today, the DA is has been marching across the country because of high electricity prices. And yet, where is the unions, COSATU in particular, that is meant to march, that is meant to take up working class and middle class issues, high utility prices? They are sitting comfortably, doing nothing. Yet the DA has taken the cudgels to discuss this issue of high electricity costs. So where is the alliance? And if the alliance continues this way, there will be a minority within the GNU in a few months' time, and we'll be back to Baskap. We're already halfway on the road to Baskap and to the and therefore, on that note, the alliance has to eat humble pie and needs for critical reflection, because this is a state of underperformance all round. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Ashraf, and also to Messi Parks, to Crown Prince Adil Nchabeleng. We thank you. We do appreciate all of you taking time out with us this evening right here on Salam Media. I must say it's been most absorbing, wonderful discussion as we unpack this legacy of Pravin Gordhan, hero of reform or architect of failure. That was the heading. And with that, once again, we say shukran jazakallah to both of you. I see Mathews has gone off. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Night with myself, Inayat Wali. And I must say, very, very interesting. But also, at the same time, I wish to reiterate our thoughts go out to the Gordhan family. We do sympathize and our condolences for your loss, to your loved ones, to his wife, and to the rest of the family. Our sympathies go. And we know it is a difficult time, and may you gain strength at this very difficult time to cope with your loss. And with that, I'm going to be signing off from myself and the team here at Salam Media. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.